I never knew that periods were not meant to be painful.
I know, isn't that crazy?
I know, and it's just like a whole fresh perspective.
The reason that I talk so much about the periods is because I used to have an extremely excruciatingly painful period that used to leave me in the dark room popping painkillers, hoping it'll go away. And one day it got so bad that I actually had to call an ambulance.
Anti-inflammatory foods.
Every single day, because every single day we should be having loads of vegetables in every single meal. We should be having a healthy dose of protein in every single meal, and we should be having a healthy dose of fat in every single meal.
Normally, like, what is a safe timeline where you can actually do these divisions to make your cycle a bit more streamlined so you know what you're eating? Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining my podcast.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. A few months ago, I actually came across your work, and it was really fascinating and kind of life-changing because I never knew that periods were not meant to be painful.
I know, isn't that crazy?
I know, and it's just like a whole fresh perspective. Well, your periods are not meant to be painful. How did you, before we go on to that big question, why don't you introduce yourself a little and tell the audience what you do?
Yeah, of course, sure can. Hi, everybody. My name is Dinara, and my last name is Mukh. If you needed to find me on socials, that's how you'd be able to do it. And I'm a certified hormone and nutrition coach, and I help women restore hormonal balance by getting to the root causes of whichever discomforts that they're experiencing in order to fix it once and for all, so that way we can feel amazing and think clearly, because every woman deserves to feel great. And the reason that I talk so much about the periods is because I used to have an extremely excruciatingly painful period that used to leave me with in the dark room popping painkillers, hoping it'll go away. And one day it got so bad that I actually had to call an ambulance. And to resolve this issue, as anyone would do, I went to the doctor, and the doctor had immediately, within 5 minutes, prescribed me a pill for birth control to go and resolve my pain. And I was extremely happy, thinking that this is exactly what's going to fix my issues. Unfortunately, it didn't help. It made things worse. After that, I've tried multiple other birth controls, didn't serve the issue, and I've decided that I'm going to heal it myself. And actually, by changing, really understanding what is happening in my body on a monthly basis, understanding a little bit what my hormones are and the massive role that they play in my menstrual cycle, I started to eat, move, and adjusted my lifestyle in a way to support my female body and welcome my first pain-free periods at the age of 30. And ever since, never looked back.
Wow. How did you go from that day when you were prescribed contraceptives to making this adjustment? What did you think, and what was that process for you?
Well, when I was prescribed contraceptive, I've taken it, and then it didn't get rid of the pill, but it made me feel sicker. It kind of got me into a place. I'm not an anxious person, and this has started to clearly affect my mental health. And I started to gain weight, and I thought that the only thing that have changed was this medication. So I went to the doctor and I said, this pill doesn't work. We're going to have to take it off and find something else. They gave me a different pill, and this happened 5 times over, each pill giving me variety of different new side effects, that's when I knew that standard traditional conventional medicine, the way that it's going to solve my problem is by masking my issue with yet another pill. And that's what I started to learn about my female body. I was like, there has to be another way. This whole masking symptoms just doesn't seem to be like the solution. And a friend of mine actually recommended at the time that I read a book about menstrual cycles, and I have, and it literally changed my life. And it was basically simple recommendations of focusing on nutrition, movements, and as I started to slowly implement, wasn't sure it was gonna work, but then it worked, and the period pain went away. And now that I understand the way that period pain is created, I can help I work with many other women to eliminate pain, to balance their hormones through the knowledge that I was able to acquire, but also through the personal experience of going through this journey myself. And I just feel like as women, we don't really get any information about how our female body functions. And my mission is to fix that.
Interesting. You're totally right, actually, when you say that medicine, conventional medicine, actually kind of masks the problem. Because what happens a lot of times is that you just get painkillers. And sometimes that's the reason why I avoid taking painkillers, because I'm like, well, that's not really fixing the problem. Why don't I wait for a day or two and my body can heal on its own? Because the body can heal on its own. That's basically how it works. It has enough power to heal on its own. But what did you change and how did you discover this? I mean, okay, you talked about how you discovered this. What did you discover that needed fixing?
So I think the thing that would really help women to imagine this is just to understand, to look at our menstrual cycle and understand that our menstrual cycle is so much more than absence and presence of our period. Just period arrives, period leaves, oftentimes because we associate the cycle with, or the period itself with the menstrual cycle. But actually, the entire menstrual cycle, the way that it's meant to, the way that it revolves around is not around our period, but around our ovulation. Every single month, a female body goes through a process where the egg is released from the follicle. We ovulate. After that, if that egg isn't fertilized, we have a period. And that's basically the process that it goes through. But this process, depending on a woman, can take anywhere between 25 to 35 days, with an average cycle length about 28 days. So, and as these hormones that sort of manage and create our menstrual cycle, the hormones help us to release the egg, the hormones help us to produce hormones, the hormones help us to menstruate. And as our body goes through this entire process, it actually goes through 4 distinct phases. And as women, we go through, and I really like to look at these phases from a season's perspective. So as women, we go through our inner winter, through our inner spring, through our inner fall, and go inner summer, inner fall, and into our inner winter. Our inner winter being our menstruation and actual period time lasts about 3 to 5 days, and it's the time 3 to 7 days, depending on the woman. And it's the times where we're kind of experiencing this inner winter. We really don't want to see anybody. We kind of just want to be retrieved at home. And our hormones are quite low because our body is doing this process of the period. Once the period finishes, we enter our inner spring. And it's kind of like any woman, I think, would recognize the time once her period is done. She's like, oh my goodness, now I have all this energy. And then we go into the period of ovulation, which is when the woman is meant to ovulate and get pregnant, sort of our fertility window. Women can only get pregnant 5 to 6 days out of our cycle. We're not fertile the entire time. And this particular ovulation is our inner summer. We feel the most outgoing. We feel like we want to be seen. Women tend to put on red lipstick, red dresses, and just feel more confident. Once we finish our ovulation, we go into the period that's called inner fall. And this is when we kind of go from the moment from like this super extroverted part of our cycle to feeling a bit more introverted and not as interested. This is a lot of times when PMS starts to come in, women get a bit moody. So every single month, we go through this inner winter, inner spring, inner summer, inner winter in our bodies, and different phase, just like you would eat warmer foods in the winter to warm yourself up and maybe fresher salads and berries in the summer. Every single season, let's call it a week that we go, every phase of the cycle requires slightly different nutrition. Sometimes it requires more fresher foods, more salads. Sometimes it requires more baked vegetables and more warmer soups and those sort of things. And actually, by working with those ebbs and flows and by changing your nutrition, we balance our hormones. So we reduce a lot of the PMS symptoms, but also we reduce overall body inflammation, because what period is just our uterus contracts. And as it contracts, it produces inflammatory bodies to heal the uterus. And there are inflammatory bodies that are like hurting the inflammatory, or there is anti-inflammatory bodies that help to heal the uterine while it's shedding. So when we have too many inflammatory bodies, that's what creates that crazy period. When we don't have these inflammatory bodies and have more anti-inflammatory bodies that heal, that is what creates pain-free period. So the goal is to eat and support your body in a way that reduces the inflammatory bodies and creates more anti-pain inflammatory anti-inflammatory bodies to heal that uterus.
Right. So let's say, you're in the middle of a cycle. Where do you start, like, to make that change?
I think it's a great question because you hear all of this and it sounds overwhelming, and you're like, where does it apply to me? For which season am I at, and what do I need to do? And I think that is such a great question. I think where we need to start is just really, first of all, just have an awareness of the fact that as a woman, you're not the same from one week to the next. And maybe even give yourself some examples and realize that there's times when you're a bit like antsy, and there's times where you just want to be out, and they are quite different. It's not crazy. It's just the hormones do change, and your body, your mood, your sleep naturally gets affected by it. And even just recognizing those changes. And the second thing is just it's starting to track your cycle. And the way that you start to track your cycle, day one of your cycle is the full day of your period. Not like the spotting that sometimes women get, but the full day. And whether you use an app, and there's so many apps, there's like a health app, there's variety, Flow Living, Clue, variety of applications that you can easily download on your phone, plug in the first date, and then just start tracking your cycle. Mark every single beginning day of your period. And by doing so for a few months, it'll tell you how long your cycle is. So from the day one of your period until the day before your period. And then you can start putting in symptoms, and then you can start looking, sort of introducing, okay, this is my period week. I know this is my inner winter. After your period for a week, you're like, okay, I know this is my spring. My body is preparing for ovulation and inner summer. And you sort of slowly, it kind of has to start with a gentle awareness. And then you start to implement one food, two foods, little lifestyle, and you'll see that your body responds. Your body will respond with more energy. Your periods will start to get lighter. The PMS will start to go down, the bloating, the mood swings, because all of those things are just communicating imbalances in our
So the
bodies.
period week is the inner winter, the week after is the inner summer. Now, inner spring, and then the ovulation is inner summer. But what's the fourth week called? Because we have like a 4-week cycle.
Yeah, inner fall, so inner autumn, fall or autumn, whichever country you're in. And that is the time when after our ovulation, it's actually the longest phase. It takes about 2 weeks from ovulation up until our period. And that phase, the name for it is luteal phase. But yeah, it's called inner fall or inner winter. I like to refer to it as such, especially if you're new to it. It's just kind of easier for the brain to wrap around these changes that happen in our body.
And that's amazing. This is so interesting. So, which phase do you need to do the most amount of work?
All of them, because each single one of them builds into the next. So as we sort of throughout our periods, the way that the menstrual cycle is, the way that the hormones release, the way that the uterine lining starts to grow, all of those things are regulated by hormones. Because what are hormones? They're basically messengers that just run around and tell our body, okay, now it's time to ovulate, and boom, the egg is released. Now it's time to get pregnant is not a good idea, but now it's time to start shedding uterine lining, boost certain hormones. So the hormones just run around and tell those things. And each and every phase goes into another. So I'll give you an example. So during your period, typically we lose a lot of blood. So it's a really good idea at this time of your cycle to focus on replenishing nutrients that are being lost through blood. And those things include things like red meat for some, if you're vegetarian, things like lentils, beans, but foods that are really rich in iron, we need to replenish those minerals. If we do that well, we will help the body restore its lost minerals. And then as we enter into our spring, we need to start introducing some healthy fats and some proteins, because after our period, basically when our period happens, all of our hormones go down and then they have to start raising. And as they go up, the hormones get built from things like amino acids and saturated fats. So by eating fats and proteins will help them to produce. And then we have to, in our inner spring, we have to eat more fresher vegetables, because as these hormones go up to leading our body to ovulation, they also have to come out from the body. They have to signal the message and go away. And they go away through our gut and through our liver. So we have to eat more vegetables and fiber in order to support the gut and liver for them to come out. And then we ovulate, which is our inner summer. And then in our inner fall, now we have this a different hormone that is in place. And now we have to eat warmer foods like warmer soups and other things in order to help our body to keep the uterine lining healthy. And in case, because the body is like, the female body is designed for reproduction, whether you want to get pregnant or not, it's irrelevant. We have to have a healthy reproductive cycle. So in sort of luteal phase, we have this, we need to support that lining just before the period comes again. So, and every phase flows into the next. So every single phase, we have to take care of it in a very specific way, but also a simple way. And every single time that you kind of like, sometimes you're like, I don't know what I want to have for lunch or for dinner today. If you look at where you are in your cycle, you'll know like, okay, I'm in my inner spring. Actually, I'm craving like lighter proteins, maybe some white fish with some veggies. And that's typically exactly what your body is craving. So it kind of tunes you into your body once you understand how those things communicate and work.
It's so interesting that you say that cravings tune us in. So when I get my period, I like to eat something really fatty, which is very unlike me because I don't like to eat fried food at all. But the only time I feel something really fatty is when I get my period. So I would actually consider eating something fried. I mean, it's very unhealthy, but it just makes me feel a bit better. Otherwise, on other days, if I eat fried food, it just has a bad aftermath. Like, not a bad aftermath, but it just makes me uneasy later. Like, the body doesn't respond really well. So is this an indication of craving? Like, does that fall within what you encourage people to take, like fatty foods when you're on your period?
Yes, I know exactly. I'll tell you why that happens. So we have these two hormones, two main ones that are driving our cycle. One of them is called estrogen. Another one is called progesterone. And you don't need to remember those names, but here how it's easy to remember. After your period, estrogen is the hormone that makes us a woman, is the hormone that helps us to grow our boobs. It helps a hormone that helps to grow our bums. It's basically what made us a woman. And it's a very important hormone for our cycle. Estrogen is also the hormone that produces like after our period, which is why we feel a lot of energy. Estrogen is kind of like a Beyonce of our hormone. It makes us want to be outgoing. It doesn't make us want to eat food because it suppresses our appetite. It makes us feel lighter. That's why eating fatty foods like for that week after the period is kind of like, I don't want that. That's going to make me too heavy, because estrogen is like, it's a Beyonce. It wants to run around. It just has a lot of energy. Then after the ovulation, once we ovulate, we have a second hormone that produces that's very important called progesterone. Progesterone is our natural anti-anxiety calming hormone. And progesterone is kind of like Kirsten Stewart. Like if you know a woman from the Twilight, like that woman who's just very different energy to Beyonce. She's more like, okay, like just very low energy, very, I don't know if low energy is the right word, but she's just very like not as, there's different energies. And this progesterone, what it does is it increases our appetite. It makes us want to hibernate. So when the reason that you start to crave certain foods is because at different phases, at different seasons of your cycle, your appetite changes. It either goes up, it goes down based on like which hormones are dominant in your body. And in the second half of your cycle, before your period, you have a dominant hormone that is hungry. It wants to eat more. So if you don't proactively adapt your foods, aka after your period, you were eating salads and things were great and you were full and fantastic. Before your period, your body needs more energy. It's because this progesterone hormone, it tends to heat up the body. Progesterone is, if you were to get pregnant, it's the most important hormone that we need, and it needs energy. So it needs food. So if you were to proactively maybe change to things like baked root vegetables, like butternut squash soups, more calorie, like chili con carne, things that are more like calorie dense, you wouldn't want to have those fried foods. Otherwise, the body will go to the things that are the simplest to get its energy. Usually it's chocolate, because glucose is the fastest access to energy, which is why we have so many chocolate cravings, or fatty foods, which is the high caloric content. So it just goes to the things that is like that it can get energy. So the body is very smart. Nothing, like none of your cravings, none of the things that are happening are like, my body's crazy. It makes no sense. It all makes so much sense once we understand these fluctuations. And when we know them, we can control them. And we can actually be able to have energy, to lose the weight, to feel good, get rid of the period pain, not have PMS. And it's just, we kind of just go through the life in a more steady way.
So, because this is so much information, I'll just kind of like, I just kind of like sum it up. So, in order to avoid those cravings during the period, I guess what you said was we need more calorie dense foods before the period.
Correct.
In the inner fall phase, basically, which leads to the inner winter. Right. Okay, interesting. And on the period, yeah, I do feel that on the period, unless I want fatty foods, I usually want light food. So the part about salads and those things, it makes sense. What part of the cycle really needs more protein though? Because this seems very much like calorie dense foods and a lot of carb in the inner fall.
Yeah, I think every single phase needs a lot of carbs. And for women in particular, we have to just focus on the carbs as much as possible. I think the healthy amount for any woman is about a 1.25 grams per kilogram of her weight per day. That's how much we should get in. So protein is important at all times, but it does become particularly important around on our period, because this is, so you said on your period, all of a sudden you're not as hungry. It's because that hungry hormone, progesterone, falls right before the period. Before period, all hormones they just drop and disappear. And as they drop and disappear, we don't get hungry anymore. We literally don't. We're like, for some of us, it's a lot of pain during our period. So period can be associated with so many things, but our appetite goes down. But actually, the protein is extremely important during that phase. But protein is how body gets energy. So there is menstrual cycle, but there's many other processes that go then within the body. And protein, how we have the long sustained energy. So for women in general, protein is important at all times. But on your period is probably the one that, specifically if you're somebody that eats meat, that's like the most probably that you'll get, because that's the time that you crave it. But yeah, like if you were to stick to any particular rule, I would think every single day is the time when you would want to focus on protein.
Right. And like the backbone of this whole thing is that periods are not meant to be painful. What is the point at which your body starts to get rid of the pain? Like, how long do you need to do this in order to see the results? And what is that one diet component which kind of is a game changer, or you know
I think we all love to get like, what is the one thing, one pill I can take to get rid of it? It's more of a whole body, like a holistic approach, and actually really does come down to understanding how your female body works. As far as how fast it can work fast. Like the women in my practice, they can have really painful periods, and within a cycle or two have either no pain or it just decreases and it gets better. You'll notice significant change after about 2 cycles, and then it'll just start getting better and better. Like my periods have not been painful for the last 5-6 years, and there are times where they do get more painful, and I know exactly what happens. As if I'm too stressed, if I'm eating, maybe I was going on a bit of a too much of eating foods that are not supportive to it. But really what it comes down to is the food that reduce inflammation, because inflammation is, World Health Organization has declared inflammation as the number one thing that'll kill humans than anything else. Inflammation, unfortunately, for so many of us, we have underlying elevated levels of inflammation because of the amount of sugars that we eat nonstop, by the chronic stresses that we experience. The body is on this constant state of alert. And when we have a lot of inflammation in our body, it'll be hard to lose weight. We will start to sort of pile in weight around our bellies, and it'll be hard to shake it off. We'll start seeing, and it'll sort of like, it'll directly affect our energy and sleep. Those are the things that we can see. So if there's one sort of diet, one way of eating that I would recommend for any woman to adopt is anti-inflammatory way of eating. And the way that we do that is just adding ton of vegetables into our diet every single day, both fresh and cooked, and also adding a large variety of vegetables because each vegetable has a different nutrient based on the color that the vegetable is. Like, for example, carrot and the cabbage and the broccoli have different nutrients because of different colors, but adding as much of a variety. And the next important nutrient is things like omega-3. Omega-3 is probably the most anti-inflammatory thing, and omega-3 is contained in places like salmon, flax seeds, chia seeds, olive oil, avocados. Like those are the things that would adding them regularly into your diet will definitely help reduce the pain and discomfort.
Anti-inflammatory foods, are they meant to be consumed at a specific part, or do you encourage people to kind of distribute that all over the month?
Every single day, because every single day we should be having loads of vegetables in every single meal. We should be having a healthy dose of protein in every single meal, and we should be having a healthy dose of fat in every single meal. The amount of those foods and maybe some of the types of those food would change. Like, for example, in our inner spring, because you're not as hungry, you may be okay with like a few eggs and some vegetables. And maybe in the time where the fall, just before your period, you may need things like chili con carne, like pasta bolognese. Like pasta bolognese can be healthy because you can have loads of tomatoes, brown pasta, fiber. Like they're very different foods, but they still both have healthy fats, healthy fiber, healthy vegetables, just cooked slightly different in a different sort of density of foods.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Like cooked vegetables have a very different feeling versus like fresh vegetables. And that's true, actually. Sometimes when you want to eat something fatty, it also means that you want to have like bolognese. It's a great example because it's meat, it's heavy. You eat it with pasta or with bread, and it's great. And so, for example, like how do you divide the cycle? Like how everybody has a different cycle, but some people have like a really long cycle. They get their period for 7 days, 5 days. That's relatively long. I mean, my benchmark is myself. My period is not that long. I get it for 3 or 4 days. It's always been like that. But normally, like, what is a safe timeline where you can actually do these divisions to make your cycle a bit more streamlined so you know what you're eating?
Yeah, I do think that every cycle is as unique as every woman. There are certain parameters which makes things normal, and I can talk about those. So the length of the cycle, so from the first day of your period until the day before your next period, should be anywhere between 25 to 35 days. It shouldn't be shorter than that or longer than that. It is completely normal for the cycle to fluctuate. Like 1 month it's 26 days, the next month it's 27 or 28 days. That is normal. It is not normal if 1 month your cycle is 25 days, the following cycle your cycle is 35 days. Though it falls within the range of normal, it's just too big of a difference. So I would definitely make the note of it and look into it, why that's happening. We'll talk to someone like me and I can help you regulate the cycles or at least give you guidance. And then your menstrual phase, your period, should be anywhere between 3 to 7 days. Depending on the woman, depending on your age, it will be different, but 3 to 7 days is normal. Your and then from your period until your ovulation, that should be about, after your period finishes until your ovulation, that should be about a week, about 7 to 10 days for the inner spring phase. The ovulation itself is really, the entire process of ovulation is actually only takes about 24 hours. So it's only 1 day, but we can kind of plug in a day around it, so 3-4 days. And then after your ovulation until your period, that phase should be at least 12 days. It shouldn't be less because it's not enough for the body to produce the hormone and actually to have a healthy reproductive system. But it should be about 14 days. So kind of 3 to 7 days, 7 to 10 days for inner spring, 3 to 4 days for inner summer, and about 12 to 14 days for inner fall. So that's kind of that's the amount of days.
So, this is great, and I think it's pretty easy to follow for people who have a regular cycle. But a lot of women actually don't have a regular cycle. And I mean, I've heard it. So I grew up, my mother's a doctor. So I grew up knowing at a very early age that if you don't have a regular cycle, that's not normal. Like, it's not normal to have an irregular cycle. Obviously, like, you can have fluctuations, 1 week here, 1 week there, once in a while. But if it's consistently irregular, then something is not right. Although I see very often around me women who have irregular cycles, and in a lot of cases they don't want to find out what's going on. I feel like it's like a lifestyle thing. Well, yeah, my period is always irregular. Well, that's not normal. So how do people who don't have a regular cycle kind of make this lifestyle adjustment? Like, what do they know? What do they have to eat at what time of the month? It's just very hard to pinpoint, right?
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. And I think you mentioned an important thing, that anything that's irregular in the female body is just not normal. And we do have to pose a question why. And I think this is where the healthy amount of curiosity and knowing your own body is really helpful for investigation purposes, because you can be like, okay, why is my cycle irregular? Was I stressed? Maybe I moved. Maybe I had a breakup. Those are the stress related things that can delay the cycle. Is it the fact that I have what's called polycystic ovarian syndrome and my body is just not ovulating? Am I not eating enough? Am I exercising too much that now I've caused myself a different condition where my periods just disappear? Like, all of this, the answers, like our periods and our monthly periods and our menstrual cycles, it's kind of like a monthly health report card for every single woman. And it's literally every single month a woman gets an opportunity based on how her period arrives and when it arrives to see how is her health. Because if your period arrives on time, your blood is like fresh red cranberry color. If it arrives with a lot of pain, your body is telling you, okay, things are well. And like, I know when my cycle is regular, it comes right on time, it comes normally without any pain. Like, I know that the choices that I have made over the last month have been good, and my body is telling me, good job, Dinara. If my cycle is late, if it comes with a lot of pain, if it comes with a lot of irregularities, I usually start asking questions. Okay, was I stressed around my ovulation? Because if you, at the time where your body needs to ovulate, if there's a lot of stress going on in your body is very smart. It'll think it's not a safe place to bring in a baby, so it'll postpone your ovulation. So it'll keep delaying it to later, to later, to later, until your body is in a safe enough state where you're not freaking out. And the body can tell us through hormones that would be able to tell that. Another thing is, if I'm eating too many fried foods, too much chocolate, too many hot dogs, too many burgers, I know these are the foods that cause inflammation in my body. So maybe my period arrived with a lot of pain. So I would find out, the number one thing is, if you do notice that they're irregular, is 100% find out why. And the way to tell it, if they're irregular, is, and if I can encourage one practice for every woman to implement, is to track our cycle. Track our cycle every single month, at least when your period starts, so that way you know whether it's irregular, so you can start asking those questions. We need to get to the root cause of why it's irregular, because once you fix it, once we know why it's irregular, the reason how to fix it becomes very obvious.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what are some of these anti-inflammatory foods that people can eat? Like, I also feel like this whole thing about you can get your period pain-free with diet, or you can get pregnant with diet, where there's a lot of awareness around these things now. But I also feel like I don't want to stop eating all the good stuff. Like all the, I don't want to stop cheating all the time. Like, I don't want to be on a clock all the time. Okay, today I have to eat this. So I also want to have the freedom. Okay, today I don't want to eat broccoli. I'm going to have salmon, or I'm going to have tuna, whatever. So how much of room do you have to play around? And what are these anti-inflammatory foods that can come in without kind of disrupting your wish list?
When you say wish list, like, what are the things that you don't want to cut out?
I mean, I don't want to cut out fish or like oysters and like exotic foods. Because I don't eat fried food normally. I don't consume a lot of bread, any kind
Yeah.
of bread, unless I'm on vacation and the bread is really great. I don't drink soft drinks. So, I mean, my sugar level is already, like, my sugar intake is already low. My fried food intake is already really, really low. The only time I do it is when I eat fast food. Now I know why I do that when I'm on my period. It just feels great. But these are the things I don't want to cut out. But I know there's a lot of people who eat a lot of stuff. Obviously, there's things everybody should cut out, I think. It's a health adjustment. Everybody should make that. But I think what I don't want to be, or a lot of people I know don't want to be, is all the time on a clock. You know, you want to do the right thing, but you also want to have the room to kind of play around and make spontaneous plans. That feeling needs to be there. And do we need to give all of that up to have this kind of lifestyle?
Yeah, what I'm definitely not saying is to give any of the foods that you named up, because these are the way that I approach food. Like, I don't feel restrictive and I eat everything, and we don't feel restrictive in any. I think the problems really come when women start to cut stuff out, or where becomes this diet mentality, or I need to cut something out mentality. The way that I usually teach women is that you're allowed to eat absolutely everything. And that's why I'm asked you which kind of foods. So the foods that are anti-inflammatory, that are good for us, are whole foods. And when we talk about whole foods, it's basically anything that has walked on the ground, anything that had swum in the sea, anything that's been beaten by the wind, or grown in the farms or in the garden. So fish, meat, vegetables, chicken, seeds, beans, like grains, all of that stuff should be in abundance in all of our diets. The only thing that we truly should consider cutting out is things that are not foods, like Twinkies, or like the deep fried foods, the donuts. And like once in a while you do want them, but when you look at them, it's really not food. Like when we actually look at the definition of what food is, and I have Googled it before online, it basically says that anything that gives body nutrients. Meat gives body nutrients, fish gives body nutrients. If you look at the food and you cannot say where it comes from, like if you look at meat, you know it comes from a cow. If you look at the donut, you're not quite sure which animal is that. Like it's not a real food that'll actually give you benefit. Skittles, like what
Right.
animal, anything that is not comes from some sort of a thing, if you don't know where it
Yeah.
comes from, that's not a real food. Everything else is like off limits.
Right.
Go crazy.
So it's so interesting you say that. I mean, I don't have a sweet tooth, which is primarily why it's really easy for me to not like indulge or overly indulge. But I know a lot of people have a sweet tooth, and this is a legitimate thing. Like, you have a sweet tooth. So does that mean like you cut out a lot of dessert? Because a lot of dessert actually comes from flour, and then it's so mutated, like it hardly exists in its original form. That's why it's so good. That's why it's so delicious. How does that work with dessert?
Well, the way that sugar came about, like nobody really has a sweet tooth, like it's a debilitating condition or personality trait. It's not a really thing. And usually the sweet food comes from some sort of an underlying thing. But back in the day, the way that we were trying in tribal days, we're trying to find foods is would have to like run for a very long time in the savannah, maybe at some point discover a beehive that would be so tiny, and then we'll just try a bit. Or we'll find the berry on the tree and then we'll kind of pick the berry in a tiny little thing and eat that. Like sugar had never really been as big a part of our diet as it had become in the last recently, since we developed the industrial food. So now we have these donuts, the carbs, and all of that. And actually, it's by abusing that we have developed what we call today as the sweet tooth. Because when we eat too much sugar, sugar is more addictive than any substance. I think based on the latest study, sugar is 8 times more addictive than cocaine, which is a very addictive drug. And there's done studies on rats where the rats were chosen to do cocaine or sugar, and they will choose sugar every single time because it is so sweet and it's so addictive. And because it's available in so much abundance, we have it. So our body learns to become dependent on it. So then we develop what we call this sweet tooth,
Right.
because we feel like if I don't have that, not good. Like it's just, I'm not going to be able to get through because I have this sweet tooth. And we report it like the news. But actually, it comes from something else. And the way that, and I don't say to get rid of the sweet tooth or never eat sweets again, but the ways that we get sweets and nice things is from places like fruits, from places like berries.
Natural sugar versus processed sugar, right?
Yeah, like a little bit of honey, dark chocolate. I think I have dark chocolate, if not every night, every second night, and it has also magnesium. When it comes to cakes, actually, cakes are so much better than things like Skittles because Skittles and candy, just pure sugar, quite literally. It's not even a food, it's just an entertainment for our mouth. And the cakes actually have butter, have flour, have cream cheese, and like whichever things that are added in it. Of course, all of these things should be done in a sort of constraint and as enjoyment rather than I'm dependent on it because I have a sweet tooth. Because I think all of it, and in my practice, oftentimes we not get rid of sweet tooth, but calm down your sweet tooth so it doesn't disrupt your health. Because when we eat too much sugar, it produces hormone called insulin, and insulin, if it's too much of it in our blood, it'll cause things like diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, and so many heavy PCOS for women, so many heavy conditions that we definitely want to make sure we control.
Yeah, I know we're a bit tight on time. I know you have to run. I just have one more thing to ask.
Yeah, of
A lot
course.
about iron. You said that when you are in your inner fall phase, which is your period week or your period days, your iron immediately drops, which makes perfect sense. A lot of times, what I would do is I would eat like beetroot before my period. Um, there is no scientific research to back why I do this. It's just a feeling. You know, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna have some beetroot. And in the winter, especially, it's just really fresh. So these days there is more beetroot. I mean, we're recording in the winter. So how does it work with iron? Because iron is not enough if you consume iron. It's also there's also a thing called iron being absorbed in your body. And you could be
Yeah.
consuming all the iron in the world, but if it's not absorbing in your body, this is like a whole thing I discovered a few years ago that it's not enough to eat iron. How do you work on the absorption?
Yeah. Well, the way that the body absorbs food is when it's not inflamed. If the body is inflamed, it'll be protecting things and it's not going to want to absorb things. So the way that we reduce inflammation is by bringing this whole foods like meats, like fish, like vegetables, and also things like fermented foods. And we basically diversify the bacteria in our gut. Like our gut, our microbiome, the world of bacteria in our gut, we actually have way more bacteria than we have cells in our body. 10 times more bacteria. So we're basically kind of like a walking bacteria. And the way that we allow for the foods and for this bacteria to absorb foods is by having a diverse bacteria. And that we have diverse bacteria when we have different fruits, vegetables, proteins, meats that we're consuming, the body gets absorbing things better. With iron in particular, things like orange juice or citrus help iron absorb a little bit better. And it is true that women are usually iron deficient because of our period. So really, depending how heavy your period is, that will play in the deficiency. And it's definitely something I recommend every woman checks and knows her levels at least every couple of years just to do routine tests because there's many things that we can do with iron. We can take liquids. I actually, with iron, if you were to take supplements, I like liquid supplements because they just absorb so much better in the body, taking it maybe with a piece of clementine or some orange juice. And also through foods like through beets. Beets actually before your period is one of the best things you can eat. And as you said, it's an intuitive thing. And because body knows what it wants, we just need to like trust it a bit more. And I
Yeah.
think as women, we've been told to go on a diet, do fasting, do exercise. We've been forcefully disconnected from our bodies for so long. And we were told that the doctor knows, the magazine knows, the latest trend knows. And we completely forgot that our intuition does. And that's like when we really strip ourselves off of like addiction to sugar or the sweet tooth things, the body starts speaking. We just have to like trust our own knowing that we'll be able to plug in.
Does it help to absorb iron better if you consume it with greens though? Because I read this online. I'm not sure how true this is.
Vitamin C. So yes, anything that will greens contain vitamin C. Most vegetables do, like things like broccoli are rich in vitamin C. Spinach is very rich
Spinach,
in
yeah.
vitamin C.
I do spinach
Yeah,
mostly.
lentils.
Yeah.
Yeah, and spinach in itself is like quite rich in iron. So anything that will, because vitamin C, we often think about it as orange because
Right.
it's just easy to associate. But yeah, any of the greens, anything that'll have vitamin C will help absorb it.
Super. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for speaking with me. I just changed my life. The periods aren't supposed to be painful. I mean, I still have painful periods, but I think I'm just lazy and I need to adapt more of this kind of lifestyle. But great research and great find there. Like, you know?
Of course, but also like start small. When you just start your period, maybe you eat a bit more meat. When you after you eat more vegetables, maybe around your ovulation you eat a bit fresher food. Then you eat a bit more beets. Like just starting one little bit every single phase of the cycle, and your body will start responding. But yes, the fried foods and all that stuff that'll create inflammation and that'll create more pain. So it's reducing. It's just really becoming just adding more vegetables and healthy whole foods into your ingredients and getting rid of stuff that's not food.
Super. Thank you so much for speaking with me. This was great. And yeah, we'll be in touch. Super. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time.